Have you ever found yourself believing in something simply because you've heard it so many times? Or maybe you felt haunted by a thought, a task, or a conversation that was left unfinished, and no matter what you did, it kept circling back into your mind? These moments seem trivial, almost ordinary, but hidden inside them are forces that shape the way we think, decide, and live every single day. Forces so subtle, so twisted, that once you see them clearly, you might never look at your own mind the same way again. Tonight, we are going to walk through more than 30 psychological tricks. Not to scare you, not to turn life into a battlefield of manipulation, but to notice, to understand, and to reclaim the steering wheel of your own mind. Because inside our heads, there are shortcuts, invisible patterns that the brain uses to save energy, to make decisions faster, to reduce confusion. These shortcuts help us survive, yet they can also betray us. They can make us buy what we don't need, trust what isn't true, or follow a path that was never truly ours. Think about a negotiation. You sit across from an employer waiting for your salary offer. The first number that leaves their lips instantly becomes an anchor. Even if it's far too low, even if you deserve more, your brain begins to circle around that first figure. Every counteroffer feels tied to it, weighed against it. That first number has power, not because it is fair, but because it came first. Or consider this, a simple slogan. Red Bull gives you wings. You've heard it so often, so casually, that part of you doesn't even question it anymore. You don't pause to ask, is that true? Your mind accepts the repetition as evidence. This is the illusory truth effect. The more something is repeated, the more true it feels. Anchors that hold us down. Truths that are not truths at all. These are not isolated tricks. They are patterns running quietly beneath the surface of our lives. So let us step slowly, one by one, through the strange corridors of the human mind. Let us notice the traps, the illusions, the levers that others may use to sway us, or that we ourselves unconsciously obey. And let us do it with gentleness, not fear. Because the more clearly we see, the more freedom we gain. 1. Illusory Truth Effect. They say the truth will set you free, but what if your mind confuses familiarity with truth? What if hearing something over and over slowly turns a falsehood into a belief you carry with certainty? This is the illusory truth effect, the tendency of the human brain to equate repetition with reality. If a statement is repeated often enough, it begins to feel true, even when no evidence exists. Why does this happen? Because the brain is lazy when it comes to verification. It saves energy. Instead of cross-checking every claim, it relies on a shortcut, the sense of familiarity. If something feels familiar, the brain whispers, it must be safe, it must be true. Think about this belief. We only use 10% of our brain. It has been said, printed, whispered in classrooms, repeated in films. For decades, people have nodded to it as if it were fact. And yet, neuroscience has long shown it to be false. Still, the rhythm of repetition has made it stick. Or take the myth that sugar makes children hyperactive. A story so common that parents swear they've seen it with their own eyes. Study after study shows no such direct effect. But the narrative is familiar, and so it feels convincing. And then there's advertising. A simple line like, Red Bull gives you wings. No one really expects wings to sprout from their shoulders. Yet the constant echo of the phrase binds the product to an idea of energy, of flight, of freedom. The more it is repeated, the less we question and the more we accept. Politicians know this. Propaganda machines know this. Marketers know this. Repeat, 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 until the echo itself feels like evidence. So how do we protect ourselves? Pause, just for 30 seconds. When you hear a claim that feels strangely familiar, ask, where did this come from? What is the source? What is the evidence? Then, as a practice, expose yourself to at least 2 opposing perspectives. Even if you don't agree with them, simply letting another viewpoint touch your mind breaks the spell of repetition. Because once you recognize the trick, the illusion weakens. The truth doesn't become clearer because it is louder. It becomes clearer because you pause to question it. And when what sounds familiar becomes true, the very next number you hear can quietly become your anchor. 2. Anchoring bias. Imagine walking into a store and the first thing you see is a jacket with a price tag of $500. You don't buy it, of course. But as you move deeper into the store, you come across another jacket. This one marked at $200. Suddenly, it feels like a bargain. Not because 200 is objectively cheap, but because your mind is still tethered to that first number. That number has become an anchor. This is the anchoring bias. The tendency of the brain to use the first piece of information it encounters as a reference point for everything that follows. Even if the first number is random, even if it's inflated, it has already shaped the frame of comparison. Restaurants use this trick constantly. They place one absurdly expensive dish at the top of the menu. Very few people order it, but its presence makes every other dish feel more reasonable. Real estate agents do the same. They might first show you a house that is overpriced, poorly located, far from ideal. You reject it, of course. But by the time they show you the second option, your brain is comparing it to the first one. And suddenly, the flaws don't seem so bad. And then there's salary negotiation. The first number spoken, whether by you or by the employer, sets the entire tone of the conversation. If they go first with a low figure, your counteroffer is likely to circle close to that anchor. If you go first with a strong, justified expectation, you set the anchor and the rest of the discussion is pulled toward it. Technology pricing plays with this too. Think about a subscription plan: basic, standard, premium. The premium tier is often priced high, not just to be purchased, but to make the mid-tier look fair by comparison. The anchor distorts value. So how do we defend ourselves? Take 30 seconds before making a decision. Ask yourself, what is the absolute value here? Would this still feel fair if I had never seen the first number? Better yet, place your own anchor in advance. State your expectation. Write down your target and let that be the reference point rather than the figure someone else throws at you. Because anchors only control us when we forget we can set our own. And if the very first number can change how we feel, then imagine what happens when the very same number is wrapped in a different frame, a different story. 3. Framing effect. 2 doctors stand in the same room. Both are honest. Both describe the very same medical procedure. But their words take you down 2 entirely different roads. The first one smiles softly and says, "This treatment has a 90% survival rate." Relief fills your chest. 90%, almost certain, hopeful. The second one looks at you with caution and says, "This treatment carries a 10% chance of death." and suddenly the room feels heavier. The numbers haven't changed. The reality is the same, but the feeling inside your body is completely different. This is the framing effect, the strange truth that human decisions can be swayed not by facts themselves, but by the way those facts are presented. A single frame of words, a subtle shift in tone, a choice of perspective. These can guide our emotions, and our emotions guide our choices. Think about food labels. One carton of yogurt says 95% fat-free. Another says contains 5% fat. They describe the exact same product. Your body will digest them in the same way, but the first feels lighter, cleaner, almost virtuous. The second feels heavier, less appealing. It is not the yogurt that changes, it is the frame. The news does this too. Unemployment drops to 5%. Sounds optimistic, like progress. But rephrased as 1 in 20 people still cannot find work. It carries the weight of struggle, urgency, even failure. Same statistic, same society. But with a different lens, the emotional story shifts. Even in personal life, frames shape us. When someone says, "You succeeded in 9 out of 10 attempts," you feel proud, competent. When the same result is framed as, "You failed once out of 10," you feel less capable, more cautious. It is one outcome split in 2 mirrors. Why does this happen? Because our minds are not neutral machines. We are creatures of story. We grasp information not only through numbers, but through the emotional colors painted around them. And once the frame is set, it is difficult to unsee. Politicians know this. Marketers know this. They craft their messages carefully, not by altering the data, but by altering the frame. They don't need to lie. They only need to present truth from an angle that makes you feel what they want you to feel. And once you feel it, the decision often follows. So how can we defend ourselves? With a pause. A simple, deliberate pause. When you hear a claim, take 30 seconds to strip the words away. Look for the raw number, the naked fact. Then rewrite it yourself in the opposite frame. Say it both ways. 90% survival, 10% death, 5% unemployment, 1 in 20 without work. Notice how your emotions swing. That swing is the proof of the illusion, because numbers are steady, facts are steady. It is only language, the frame, that bends around them, shaping the way they enter your heart. And once you see the frame, you are no longer trapped inside it. You can hold the fact itself without letting someone else's choice of words tell you how to feel. But sometimes, the distortion doesn't stop at words. Sometimes, once you notice something new, a phrase, a car, an idea, it seems to appear everywhere you look, not because the world has changed, but because your mind has. 4. Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, frequency illusion. Have you ever learned a new word and then suddenly heard it 3 times in the same week? Or maybe you decided on a car model, and from that moment on, it seemed like the entire city was driving the exact same one? It feels uncanny, almost supernatural, as if the universe is sending you signals. This is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also called the frequency illusion. The strange sense that once we notice something new, it begins to appear everywhere. But the world hasn't changed. What has changed is your attention. And once your attention shifts, the illusion is born. The mechanism is simple. Your brain is a filter. At every moment, it is bombarded with more information than it could ever process. Colors, sounds, faces, words, movements, patterns. To protect itself, it ignores most of it. Selective attention allows only certain details through. And confirmation bias then seals the trick. When you see the thing again, your mind counts it as proof that it is suddenly everywhere. Think of the moment you first hear the word sonder, that beautiful term for the realization that every passerby has a life as vivid and complex as your own. For years, you never heard it. Then, after learning it once, you notice it on a podcast, in a book, in a stray online post. It feels like a wave, but the word was always there. You simply weren't tuned to it. Or imagine shopping for a car. You're leaning toward a silver hatchback. The next day, you notice silver hatchbacks at every corner, every traffic light, every highway. Not because people rushed out to copy you, but because your brain is tagging that image as significant. The illusion can be delightful, but it can also be dangerous. Conspiracy theories thrive on it. Once you believe a secret pattern exists, your attention will begin to filter reality in ways that constantly confirm the idea. Every symbol becomes suspicious. Every coincidence becomes a sign. And the more you notice, the more certain you feel, when in truth, nothing new has happened except the narrowing of your focus. So how do we protect ourselves? Pause. Ask one simple question. Has the world truly changed? Or has my attention changed? Then take 30 seconds to search for one piece of disconfirming evidence. If you think a car model is suddenly everywhere, look for all the cars that are not that model. If you think a word is flooding the world, count how many conversations do not contain it. This act alone breaks the illusion because it widens your lens. The frequency illusion reminds us of a humbling truth. What we notice is not the same as what exists. Our reality is shaped not only by the world outside, but by the spotlight of our own awareness. And when awareness changes, it feels as if the world itself has shifted. But the world is steady. It is our focus that moves. And sometimes, when belief collides with reality, the brain goes even further. It doesn't just filter what we see. It rewrites the story inside us, bending our convictions so that they fit more comfortably. 5. Cognitive dissonance. Inside each of us, there is a quiet hunger for consistency. We want our beliefs, our choices, and our actions to line up neatly. When they don't, when they clash, something inside us begins to ache. This is a cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when we hold two conflicting ideas or when our actions betray our own values. And because the discomfort is sharp, the mind will rush to soothe it. It will bend beliefs. It will rewrite stories. It will justify even against reality just to ease the tension. Imagine this. You spent far too much money on a piece of clothing. Deep down, you know the price was unreasonable, but the thought is painful. So instead, your mind whispers, it's an investment. The quality is worth it. It will last forever. You reshape the story to protect your sense of self, or think of relationships. You remain in a partnership that drains you, one that you know is harmful. But walking away would mean admitting that the years invested were wasted. So your mind creates another script. I've already given so much. It must mean this bond is valuable. Maybe things will change. The belief is reshaped, not because it is true, but because the alternative feels unbearable. Marketers know this well. They set up free trials, small commitments, subtle steps. Each yes nudges you toward the next, because once you've agreed, you want to remain consistent with the person you believe yourself to be. political campaigns rely on the same trick. They ask for small displays of support, a sticker, a post, a casual pledge, knowing that each small step pushes you further into alignment with their larger narrative. Even cults operate this way, drawing people in with small acts of devotion and then reshaping beliefs to match increasingly extreme behaviors. The discomfort of dissonance is so powerful that we would rather twist the truth than admit contradiction. We tell ourselves we smoke because it helps with stress. We justify reckless spending because life is short. You only live once. We excuse toxic loyalty because I am not the kind of person who gives up easily. Each story soothes the pain, but it also hides the truth. So how do we protect ourselves? Take a deliberate pause. 30 seconds. Ask yourself directly, am I explaining this because I truly believe it? Or am I explaining it because I cannot bear to admit I was wrong? Then write down 1 or 2 reasons that challenge your current choice. Not to shame yourself, but to open a door to clarity. To remind yourself that dissonance is not fatal. It is simply a signal, a call to align your actions with your deeper values. Because when you notice the stories your mind invents to protect you, you gain a rare freedom. The freedom to stop bending reality. The freedom to step back, to admit, to change. And when belief collides with reality, the mind will try to rewrite the script. But sometimes, even the act of not finishing, of leaving something incomplete, can take hold of us just as strongly. 6. Zeigarnik Effect. Think of the last time you watched a television series that ended an episode on a cliffhanger. The hero trapped, the question unresolved. The screen faded to black, and you found yourself clicking next episode almost without thinking. This is no accident. It is the Zeigarnik Effect, the tendency of the human mind to hold on tightly to unfinished tasks, incomplete stories, unresolved tensions. The mind treats them like open loops, circling again and again until they are closed. The mechanism is simple, but relentless. When we complete a task, the mind releases it, freeing up space. But when something is left dangling, the brain marks it as pending unfinished business. It hovers in the background, whispering, demanding attention, pulling us back. Think of arguments that never reached resolution. You walk away, but the conversation replays in your head for hours, sometimes days. Not because the words were especially profound, but because the loop remains open. Your mind aches for closure. Think of free trials and unfinished forms online. A subscription you started but didn't confirm. A game that gave you the first level free, leaving the rest locked. Your brain treats it as incomplete, nudging you toward finishing what you began. Even mundane tasks carry this weight. A half-written email, a book left midway through a chapter, a to-do list with one box unchecked. Each one occupies more mental space than it deserves, simply because it remains unresolved. But the Zeigarnik Effect is not always an enemy. It can be a powerful ally. Writers sometimes stop in the middle of a sentence, knowing their brain will keep working on it unconsciously, ready to finish later. Students who pause halfway through a chapter often return with sharper focus. And for procrastinators, the trick of just start for 2 minutes works, because beginning creates a loop that the brain now wants to close. The pull of the unfinished can drain us, but it can also motivate us. The key is how we choose to use it. So how do we protect ourselves from endless mental clutter? Try a brain dump. When you feel weighed down by tasks left undone, take 30 seconds and write them all out. every unfinished thought, every loose thread. By putting them on paper, you signal to your brain, it is safe. The loop is stored. You can let go for now. And in that release, the mind relaxes, because the Zeigarnik Effect reminds us closure is nourishment for the brain. To finish is to free. But to leave something incomplete can also be harnessed, to pull us back into action, to keep us moving forward. And sometimes, even the things we are told not to do, the choices we are warned against, can begin to tug at us just as strongly. A different kind of loop, a forbidden fruit that makes us want it all the more. 7. Reverse psychology. Have you ever noticed that the moment someone tells you not to do something, a part of you wants to do it even more? It could be as small as a parent saying, "Don't press that button," and suddenly your finger itches to press it, or as subtle as a sign in a park that says, "Do not walk on the grass." The grass looks greener, softer, almost inviting, precisely because it is off limits. This is reverse psychology. It works because of a force psychologists call reactance. When we feel our freedom of choice being restricted, we instinctively push back. We want to reclaim our autonomy, to prove that we are not under control. The forbidden becomes tempting. The scarce becomes precious. And the very act of being told no can transform into a reason to say yes. Marketers have mastered this. Think of an advertisement that whispers, "Only for the bold, only for the brave." Suddenly, buying the product is no longer about the product itself. It becomes a test of identity. Are you bold enough? Are you part of the chosen few? Negotiators sometimes use it as well. A skilled salesperson might shrug and say, "Perhaps this offer isn't right for you. Maybe it's not worth your time." And instead of walking away, you feel a sudden spark of defensiveness. Why wouldn't it be right for me? Of course I can handle it. You lean in precisely because you were nudged away. Parents know this dance all too well. Tell a child, "Don't touch that," and curiosity becomes irresistible. Tell a teenager, "You can't be friends with them," and the friendship deepens in defiance. The very act of control fuels rebellion. But the trick is not always innocent. In toxic relationships, reverse psychology can become manipulation. A partner might say, "You wouldn't be able to manage without me." And in the effort to prove independence, the other person clings even tighter. Reactance, when exploited, can trap as much as it can liberate. So how do we guard against this pull of the forbidden? Pause. Just one breath, 30 seconds of reflection before reacting. Ask yourself, do I truly want this? Or am I only chasing it because someone told me I shouldn't? By naming the impulse, by separating desire from defiance, you reclaim your freedom to choose. Because true autonomy is not doing the opposite of what you're told. It is choosing from clarity, not from reflex. And if even a simple "don't" can twist our choices, imagine what happens when the options themselves multiply. When instead of too few choices, we face too many, and the weight of deciding becomes its own burden. 8. Paradox of choice. Imagine standing in front of a supermarket shelf lined with 30 different kinds of jam. Strawberry, raspberry, blackberry, apricot, organic, sugar-free, with seeds, without seeds. You only came for one jar, but now you freeze. Your eyes move back and forth, your hand hesitates, and instead of feeling free, you feel trapped. This is the paradox of choice. The strange reality that more options do not always bring more happiness. In fact, they often bring the opposite: paralysis, anxiety, and regret. Psychologists have studied this. When shoppers were given 6 types of jam, they were far more likely to make a purchase than when they were offered 24. The abundance of choice, instead of empowering them, overwhelmed them. And even those who did make a choice from the larger set felt less satisfied afterward, haunted by the possibilities they had left behind. You can feel this in everyday life, scrolling through endless movies on a streaming platform until it's too late to watch anything at all. Browsing online shops for hours, adding items to your cart, then abandoning them because the decision feels impossible. Even in relationships, the illusion of limitless options, endless profiles on dating apps, can lead to shallower connections, because with every swipe, the mind whispers, "What if there's someone better, just one scroll away?" Why does this happen? Because every choice carries a hidden cost. When you pick one option, you must let go of the rest. And the more options there are, the more potential losses your mind imagines. Regret seeps in, not from what you gained, but from what you might have missed. This is the shadow side of freedom. Choice, when abundant, can become a burden. The weight of possibility presses down until action itself feels too heavy. So how can we lighten this weight? The answer is not to eliminate choice, but to frame it. First, define your non-negotiables. 3 criteria, no more. If you are buying a phone, perhaps it must have a good camera, enough storage, and a price within budget. Everything else is secondary. By setting these pillars in advance, you filter the noise. Second, give yourself a deadline. Decision-making expands to fill the time you allow. By limiting the window, you free yourself from endless analysis. A timer turns hesitation into momentum. Third, reduce the set consciously. Instead of staring at 30 options, narrow them to 3. 3 is a human number, digestible, manageable. From there, choosing feels lighter, more humane. Because the truth is, perfection does not exist. The perfect option is an illusion. What matters is not finding the single best choice in the universe, but choosing one path fully and living it well. So when the world overwhelms you with infinite options, step back. Define what matters most, set your boundaries, and allow yourself to move forward. Freedom is not about having every door open. It is about having the courage to walk through one. And if too many choices can paralyze us, sometimes a single clever trick can push us into saying yes, even when we would rather say no. 9. Door in the face. Picture this. A charity worker approaches you on the street. With a warm smile, they ask, "Would you be willing to volunteer 10 hours every week for the next 6 months?" You hesitate. The request is overwhelming, impossible to accept. You shake your head, politely decline. Then comes the follow-up. That's okay. Maybe instead, you could donate just $10 today. Suddenly, by comparison, the smaller request feels modest, almost easy. And before you realize it, you reach into your pocket. This is the door in the face technique. The psychological trick where an initial, oversized request is presented, one that is almost certain to be rejected. After the refusal, a smaller, more reasonable request is made. The second request feels like a concession, and you feel compelled to meet it halfway. The name comes from the image, a door slammed in your face after a bold demand. But instead of walking away, the requester gently knocks again, this time with something smaller. and you feel more inclined to let them in. Why does it work? Because of the principle of reciprocity. When someone appears to reduce their demand, your brain interprets it as a gesture of compromise. And you, in turn, feel social pressure to compromise as well. They step down, so I should step up. The dance of give and take is powerful, even when the steps are carefully staged. This technique shows up everywhere. In sales, a company might first pitch a premium package that costs thousands, knowing you will decline. Then, they slide in the mid-tier option, which suddenly feels affordable. In negotiations, someone might begin with an ambitious demand, expecting rejection, just to make their real target seem fair. Even in daily life, a friend might ask for a huge favor, help them move across the city for an entire weekend. When you refuse, they settle for a ride to the train station. Compared to the first request, it feels small, even generous of them to reduce it. But here lies the boundary. The first request must be bold, but not absurd. If it is too extreme, if a stranger asked you for $1 million, you would not feel compelled to compromise. You would feel manipulated, insulted, or even angry. The technique only works when the first request is large enough to decline, but still within the realm of possibility. So how can we protect ourselves from being nudged into unwanted agreements? Pause for 30 seconds. Ask yourself, if this smaller request had been the very first one, without the big ask before it, would I have said yes? If the answer is no, then the illusion is revealed. You are not agreeing because the request is reasonable. You are agreeing because of the contrast. The door in the face reminds us that human beings are wired for fairness, for give and take. It is one of our greatest strengths, but also one of our softest vulnerabilities. And once you see how a rejected request can open the door for the real one, you begin to notice its mirror image, the technique that works in reverse, not starting big and moving down, but starting small, then building up. 10. Foot in the door. Sometimes the easiest way to open a heavy door is not to push it wide in one motion, but to slip a foot inside, just enough to keep it from closing. From there, every nudge becomes easier. Every step feels more natural. And before you realize it, the door is wide open. This is the foot in the door technique, a psychological strategy that begins with a small request. So small, so harmless, that refusing would feel strange. And once you say yes to that tiny step, your mind begins to shape a story. I am the kind of person who supports this. I am the kind of person who says yes. With that identity in place, agreeing to the next, larger request feels consistent. It feels right. Picture a stranger on the street asking you to sign a petition for cleaner parks. It takes only a second. You scribble your name and you feel good about it. Weeks later, the same organization asks if you would be willing to donate money to support the cause. And because you already said yes once, you are more likely to say yes again. Not because the second request is easier, but because your mind wants to stay aligned with your earlier choice. Think of a free trial for an app. You download it, curious but cautious. No risk, no payment, just a small yes. Days later, as the trial ends, you are asked to subscribe, and suddenly that small yes whispers in your mind, I'm already a user. This fits who I am now. The leap from free to paid feels less like a decision and more like a continuation of who you have become. Even in relationships, this pattern unfolds. Agreeing to one small favor Helping a neighbor carry a bag makes you more likely to agree to a larger one later, like watering their plants while they travel. Each step builds a chain of consistency, and breaking that chain feels uncomfortable. Why does this work? Because human beings crave coherence. We want our actions to match our self-image. The first yes plants a seed. I am helpful, supportive, generous. And from that seed, larger behaviors grow. But this technique is not always harmless. In manipulative settings, it can escalate. A group might first ask for a tiny public show of support, then slowly lead you into deeper commitments, financial, ideological, even extreme. Each step feels justified only because the one before it was already taken. So how do we protect ourselves? With a simple question. Take 30 seconds before agreeing to the next request and ask, if I had not already said yes to the smaller request, would I still say yes to this larger one? If the answer is no, then your agreement is not about the new choice. It's about the need to remain consistent. And knowing that frees you to step back. Because consistency is valuable, but only when it reflects your true values, not when it locks you into a path you never intended to walk. The foot in the door shows us how powerful one small yes can be. It can open opportunities, build habits, and create progress. But it can also open the door to manipulation. The challenge is to know when the yes belongs to you and when it belongs to someone else's design. And if a single small yes can grow into something larger, imagine how easily a carefully placed decoy can steer us into the choice someone wants us to make. 11. Decoy Effect. Imagine standing at a movie theater counter. You're buying popcorn. The choices are simple: a small tub for $3 or a large tub for $7. You pause. 3 feels too small, 7 feels too much. Then the cashier mentions a third option, a medium tub for $6.50. Suddenly, the decision shifts. For just 50 cents more, you can upgrade to the large. The large now feels like the smartest deal, the most logical choice. And yet, the only reason it feels that way is because of the decoy. This is the decoy effect, a subtle but powerful trick where an additional, less attractive option is introduced, not to be chosen, but to steer you toward the target choice. The decoy acts like a compass, pointing where the seller wants you to go. Yugishthatra doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to make the right option shine. The mechanism is simple. Our brains rarely evaluate choices in isolation. Instead, we compare them against each other. When the decoy enters, it creates an obvious loser. That loser makes another option, the one designed to be chosen, look like a clear winner. It is not rational comparison. It is relative contrast. Businesses know this well. Subscription services often present 3 plans: basic, standard, premium. The standard plan is usually the target. The premium exists partly as a decoy, making standard appear balanced, affordable, and safe. Very few choose premium, but its presence makes standard irresistible. Even in dating apps or hiring decisions, subtle decoys appear. 2 candidates might be equally strong, but introduce a third, weaker candidate who resembles one of them, and suddenly the stronger version of that pair looks far more appealing. The decoy reshapes perception, tilting the scale. But here's the danger. Because the decoy is designed not to be chosen, we rarely notice it. We think we are being logical, careful, rational. In truth, we are being guided by an option that was never real competition. The choice was designed to be made before we even walked in. So how do we defend ourselves? Take 30 seconds before deciding. Ignore the relative comparisons. Score each option on its own merits, as if it existed alone. Ask, would I still choose this if it were the only option on the table? If the answer is no, then the decoy has done its job, and you have seen through the trick. Because the decoy effect teaches us something deeper about the human mind. We do not choose in a vacuum. We choose in contexts, in contrasts, in frames that others set for us. Freedom, then, is not just about the options in front of us. It is about recognizing when one of those options was never meant for us at all. And if a single false option can tilt our judgment, imagine the force of scarcity when an option appears not only attractive, but rare, fleeting, about to disappear. 12. Scarcity Principle. Imagine booking a hotel online. You find a room you like, and just as you hesitate, a red warning flashes on the screen. Only 2 rooms left at this price. Your pulse quickens. Suddenly, it doesn't matter that you weren't sure about the location or that the price stretched your budget. Scarcity has entered the room, and it whispers, act now or lose it forever. This is the scarcity principle. The instinctive belief that rare things must be valuable, that what is hard to obtain is worth more than what is easy. And when scarcity is combined with urgency, it lights up the ancient circuits of fear and survival. We feel compelled to act, not out of desire, but out of fear of missing out. Marketers rely on this every day. Sales count down with digital timers. Offer ends in 2 hours. E-commerce sites remind you, 3 people are viewing this right now. Exclusive drops of sneakers, limited edition gadgets, once-in-a-lifetime concerts. Scarcity makes them irresistible. But scarcity isn't only in shopping. Think of relationships. A person who is emotionally unavailable, who gives only fragments of their attention, often feels more desirable simply because access is scarce. The same dynamic plays out in friendships, careers, even opportunities. The less available something seems, the more value we project onto it. Why does this happen? Because for most of human history, scarcity signaled survival. Food, shelter, resources. What was rare truly mattered. Our brains evolved to chase what was slipping away. But in the modern world, scarcity is often engineered. The danger isn't in losing something essential. It is in being manipulated into chasing what we never truly needed. Scarcity also amplifies FOMO, the fear of missing out. Even when we don't deeply want the item, the thought of others having it while we don't can sting. So we buy tickets to events we don't attend. We stockpile products we don't use. We join experiences not because they enrich us, but because we fear being left behind. So how do we resist this ancient pull? With a pause, 30 seconds. When scarcity flashes before you, ask one grounding question. Do I truly want this? Or am I only afraid of losing it? Write down the answer. Be honest. If desire fades once fear is named, then scarcity was the only hook. But if desire remains clear and steady, then you can move forward knowing it is your choice, not your panic. Because scarcity can make us impulsive, but it can also sharpen appreciation. Knowing that time is limited can make us treasure a moment more deeply. Knowing that life itself is finite can inspire us to live with greater presence. The difference is whether scarcity is used against us or awakened within us. So the next time that you feel the rush of urgency, breathe. Scarcity is powerful, but it is not always truth. What is rare is not always valuable, and what is abundant is not always less. But But if the fear of losing something can change how we act, imagine the even deeper fear of losing what we already have. The pain of loss does not just push us, it can overpower the joy of gain. 13. Ben Franklin Effect. Most of us believe that if we want someone to like us, the best way is to be generous to them. Offer them a favor, extend a hand, give a gift. It feels natural. If I help you, you'll appreciate me more. But the human mind is not always so straightforward. Sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes when someone does a favor for you, they end up liking you more. This is the Ben Franklin Effect, a curious paradox named after the American statesman, inventor, and diplomat. Franklin once wrote in his autobiography about how he turned a rival in the legislature into an ally. Instead of showering him with gifts or praise, Franklin asked him for a favor, the loan of a rare book. The rival agreed, and afterward, Franklin noticed that the man's attitude softened. He treated Franklin more kindly, more warmly, as though a small bridge of respect had been built. Why does this happen? Because of cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when our actions and our beliefs clash. If I do a favor for someone I don't like, my brain feels tension. So to reduce the discomfort, it rewrites the story. I must like them after all, otherwise why would I have helped? The act of helping reshapes the feeling. You can see this in everyday life. A colleague lends you a pen. Later, they're more open to conversation. A neighbor waters your plants while you're away, and the bond between you grows stronger, not because you helped them, but because they helped you. It also explains why shared struggles often forge deep friendships. When people work together through hardship, each small act of help reinforces the belief we must care for one another. The Ben Franklin Effect is a gentle tool, but also a subtle manipulation. Leaders, teachers, even marketers can use it to build goodwill. A politician might ask for a small show of support, a signature, a moment of time. Once given, the supporter feels more aligned, more invested. A brand might invite you to answer a survey or share feedback. Once you give the small favor, you unconsciously feel closer to the brand. But this effect can also be used with kindness, with sincerity. When we allow others to help us, we give them a chance to invest in the relationship. That investment makes the bond stronger. It reminds us the connection is not built only by what we give, but by what we allow ourselves to receive. So how do we apply this wisely? Don't always rush to be the one who helps first. Sometimes invite help. Ask for something small, a recommendation, a perspective, a simple piece of advice. By doing so, you create space for the other person to invest in you. And in that act of giving, their perception of you grows warmer. Because at its heart, the Ben Franklin Effect reveals a deeper truth. Relationships are not strengthened only by generosity flowing outward. They are also nourished when we allow generosity to flow in. And once we understand that a single small favor can change the way someone feels about us, we begin to see how powerful impressions can be, how one shining trait, one bright halo, can color the way people see us entirely. 14. Social proof. Imagine walking down a quiet street and seeing two identical restaurants side by side. One is nearly empty, only a single table occupied. The other is buzzing with people, tables filled, laughter spilling out the door. Which one would you choose? If you're like most of us, you'd step into the crowded one, not because you checked the menu, not because you studied the chef's reputation, but because the crowd itself whispered, "This must be the better choice." This is social proof. The tendency to look to others when we are uncertain. When we don't know what to do, we follow the crowd, believing that so many people can't all be wrong. It happens in subtle ways every day. Think of a sitcom where the jokes are followed by canned laughter. Even if the joke isn't funny, hearing others laugh makes you more likely to laugh along. Or consider the line outside a store. Sometimes the line is not a result of demand. It is part of the strategy. A crowd creates curiosity, and curiosity creates more of a crowd. Online, social proof is everywhere. 1 million people have already downloaded this app. This product has 5,000 five-star reviews. We take numbers as validation, as though sheer popularity equals quality. But here lies the shadow. Reviews can be faked. Bots can inflate numbers. Crowds can be staged. A rally might look like a groundswell of agreement, when in reality, it is carefully orchestrated to create the illusion of consensus. What we think is proof may only be performance. Why does this work so well on us? Because for most of human history, following the group meant survival. If the tribe ran, you ran. If the tribe avoided a certain plant, you avoided it too. To go against the group was dangerous. Our brains evolved to treat the crowd as a shortcut to safety. But the modern world is not the savannah. The crowd is not always wise. Sometimes it is manipulated. Sometimes it is blind. Sometimes it is chasing something empty. So, how do we protect ourselves? Pause. Take 30 seconds to ask, am I doing this because I truly want it, or because I saw others doing it? If the desire fades when you remove the image of the crowd, then the proof was never proof at all. It was only pressure. Social proof is not always bad. It can guide us toward restaurants we might enjoy, books we might treasure, communities we might belong to. But when we lean on it unconsciously, it can steer us into choices we never wanted, paths we never questioned, because the wisdom of the crowd can be real, but it can also be an illusion. And sometimes, the more people present, the less likely anyone is to act at all. 15. Bystander Effect. Imagine standing in a busy city square. A person suddenly collapses on the ground. Dozens of people are nearby. Shoppers, commuters, tourists. You wait for someone to rush forward, to kneel, to call for help. But no one moves. People glance, hesitate, shuffle nervously, yet remain frozen. And without realizing it, you too stand still. This is the bystander effect, the unsettling truth that the more people are present during an emergency, the less likely any one of them is to take action. Why does this happen? Two forces are at play. The first is diffusion of responsibility. When many people witness the same event, the sense of personal duty is diluted. Each person unconsciously thinks, someone else will step in. Someone else will call for help. And when everyone thinks this way, no one acts. The second is social influence. We look to the reactions of others to decide how serious a situation is. If no one else seems alarmed, we doubt our own instincts. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. And so we mirror the stillness of the crowd, mistaking inaction for reassurance. History offers chilling examples. The infamous case of Kitty Genovese in New York in the 1960s, where dozens of neighbors heard or saw parts of an attack but failed to intervene, became a classic illustration of the bystander effect. But it doesn't only happen in extreme moments. It plays out in classrooms when bullying is ignored, on trains when harassment goes unchecked, in workplaces when unethical behavior is witnessed but left unchallenged. The paradox is painful. The presence of more witnesses does not guarantee more help. It often guarantees less. So what can break the spell? Clarity and specificity. In emergencies, the vague cry of "somebody help" often falls flat. But when one voice points directly, "You in the red jacket, call an ambulance," responsibility sharpens. The diffusion collapses and action begins. And in our daily lives, the same principle applies. If you see something wrong, don't assume silence means safety. Trust your perception. Act even if others stand still. One person's movement can break the paralysis of the whole crowd. So here's a practice. Take 30 seconds to imagine yourself not as one face in the crowd, but as the one who chooses to move. Picture yourself speaking, stepping forward, breaking the stillness. By rehearsing it in your mind, you make it easier to do when the moment is real. Because the bystander effect reminds us of something essential. The crowd may hesitate, but responsibility lives in the individual, and courage does not wait for consensus. And yet, while a crowd can silence us, it can also sweep us along. Sometimes the sheer weight of numbers doesn't paralyze, it persuades. The more we see others agree, the more we are pulled to join them, even without questioning why. 16. Halo and horn effect. Think of the last time you met someone new. Perhaps they carried themselves with confidence, dressed sharply, spoke with ease. Without even realizing it, a part of you began to assume other things about them. They must be intelligent. They must be capable. They must be kind. All from one shining trait. This is the halo effect. When a single positive characteristic casts a glow that colors everything else. Attractive people are assumed to be more trustworthy. Confident speakers are believed to be more competent. A single strength lights up the whole portrait. But the reverse is just as powerful. The horn effect. When one flaw darkens the rest of the picture. A stumble in speech makes us question someone's expertise. A single mistake at work overshadows months of dedication. A bad first impression sticks like a stain, pulling every later judgment into its shadow. These effects are shortcuts of the brain. Our minds prefer simple narratives over complex truths. It is easier to believe that one good trait means a good person overall, or one flaw means a flawed person entirely. But reality is never so simple. A person can be brilliant in one domain and careless in another, kind in private, ruthless in public, graceful on stage, clumsy at home. You can see the halo effect in classrooms, where teachers sometimes grade more generously when a student is charming or enthusiastic. You can see the horn effect in workplaces, where one mistake brands someone as unreliable, even if their overall record is strong. It shapes our politics, when a leader's charisma makes us overlook deeper flaws. It shapes our relationships, when one dazzling quality blinds us to red flags. Marketers exploit this constantly. A sleek design, a polished logo, a clever slogan. These create halos that make us assume the product itself must be superior. Conversely, a typo on a website, a poorly lit photo, can cast a horn effect that makes us doubt the entire brand. The danger lies in how invisible these biases feel. We think we are being rational. We think our judgments are objective. But often, we are simply basking in the glow of a halo or recoiling from the shadow of a horn. So how do we protect ourselves? With awareness and with a pause. Take 30 seconds and ask, am I judging based on solid evidence, or am I letting one trait dominate my view? List at least 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses separately. See if the balance shifts once the glow or the shadow is named, because people are not halos or horns. They are full constellations, a mix of light and shadow. And the more we learn to look beyond the single trait, the closer we come to seeing the whole human being. The halo and horn effects remind us first impressions are powerful, but they are not the whole truth. A single shine can dazzle. A single flaw can distort. But real understanding lives in the complexity in between. And once we see how one trait can tilt our perception, we notice another illusion, one that makes us think others are watching us far more closely than they really are. 17. Mere exposure effect. Think of a song you didn't like the first time you heard it. Maybe it felt strange, offbeat, even annoying. But after hearing it again and again, on the radio, in a cafe, on a friend's playlist, you catch yourself humming the tune. It has crept into your mind, softened into comfort. This is the mere exposure effect. The psychological phenomenon where repeated contact with something makes us like it more. Not because the thing has changed, not because we discovered new qualities, but simply because it became familiar. Our brains are wired for this. What is familiar feels safe. What is repeated feels trustworthy. It's a survival instinct. Strange things may be threats. Familiar things are less likely to harm us. So with every repetition, resistance lowers and affection quietly grows. You can see it in branding. A company logo that appears on billboards, in ads, on social media. Over time, it begins to feel like part of the landscape of your life. And because it is familiar, it feels reliable, even before you've tried the product. You can see it in politics. A candidate's name repeated endlessly, flashed across news, debates, posters. The name alone begins to feel like a safe choice, not because of deeper knowledge, but because repetition breeds comfort. And you can see it in relationships. 2 people crossing paths repeatedly at work, at the gym, at the same cafe, often develop warmer feelings toward each other, even without deep interaction. Familiarity itself becomes a form of connection. But the mere exposure effect is not unlimited. Familiarity can turn to fondness, but overexposure can breed boredom, even irritation. The song you once tolerated becomes the one you skip. The ad you once accepted becomes the one you block. There is a tipping point between comfort and fatigue. Marketers and creators constantly dance on this line, trying to stay in your sight often enough to feel familiar, but not so often that you grow weary. So how can we use this knowledge in a healthier way? Instead of letting others exploit it, we can apply it deliberately in our own lives. If repetition builds affection, then small habits become easier when we simply keep showing up. For example, if you want to cultivate a new habit, journaling, stretching, practicing gratitude, don't demand perfection at the start. Simply expose yourself to it every day for a week, even 5 minutes, even 2 lines written. By day 7, what once felt foreign will feel more natural, simply because it is familiar. Here's a small exercise. Pick one positive practice you've been avoiding because it feels strange. For 7 days, do it in small doses. Notice how, by the end, it feels less like effort and more like routine. This is the mere exposure effect at work. Familiarity transforming discomfort into acceptance. The lesson is simple but profound. We don't always love what is best. We often love what is familiar. An awareness of this can help us pause before assuming our preferences are purely rational. Because sometimes our affection is not chosen, it is repeated into us. And when familiarity alone can warm our feelings, imagine how much stronger the effect becomes when expectation itself begins to shape reality. 18. Pygmalion and Golem Effect. Have you ever noticed how deeply the expectations of others can shape the way you perform? A teacher who believes in you can make you try harder. A manager who doubts you can quietly drain your energy. Expectation, invisible but powerful, has the ability to lift us or to pull us down. This is the Pygmalion effect, when high expectations placed upon someone lead them to perform better. It works like this. A teacher expects a student to excel, so they give more encouragement, more challenging material, more belief. The student senses that belief, works harder, and often lives up to it. The reverse is the Golem effect, when low expectations cause performance to decline. If a leader quietly assumes the worker will fail, they may give less support, less trust. The worker senses this doubt, loses confidence, and tragically proves the low expectation true. Both effects operate through the same loop. Belief shapes behavior, behavior shapes effort, and effort shapes outcome. And once the outcome arrives, it confirms the belief, creating a self-fulfilling cycle. Research in classrooms has shown this clearly. When teachers were told certain students had special potential, chosen at random, the students later performed better, simply because the teachers unconsciously treated them as capable. The expectations became prophecy. You see it in workplaces too. Employees trusted with responsibility rise to the challenge. Those treated as unreliable shrink into the label. In relationships, partners who expect growth and kindness from one another often nurture it. Those who expect disappointment often find it. But expectations are not only external. We carry them within ourselves. The way you talk to yourself, the standards you set, can either become your Pygmalion, lifting you upward, or your Golem, holding you down. When you expect to fail, you prepare less, you hesitate more, and failure becomes more likely. When you expect to grow, you take risks, you persist, and progress follows. So how do we use this knowledge wisely? Set expectations that are high enough to inspire, but grounded enough to be achievable. Unrealistic demands crush, but realistic, stretching goals nurture strength. And pair expectation with feedback. Tell a student, not only I believe in you, but also here is how you can improve. Tell yourself, not only I can do this, but also here are the steps I'll take. Expectation without guidance becomes pressure. Expectation with support becomes fuel. Here's a practice. For the next task you face, set one high but realistic expectation for yourself. Write it down, then add one concrete action that supports it. This simple pairing, belief plus behavior, creates a cycle that feeds success instead of draining it. Because the Pygmalion and Golem effects remind us, we are not shaped only by talent, but by the stories told around us and the stories we tell ourselves. To be lifted or to be limited often depends on expectation. And once we see how belief can shape outcome, we begin to notice another distortion. How easily we believe others are watching us, judging us, paying far more attention to our flaws than they truly are. 19. Spotlight and Pratfall Effect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt as if every eye turned toward you? Perhaps you stumbled over a word during a presentation and thought, everyone must be replaying that in their heads. Or you noticed a stain on your shirt and felt it glowing like a beacon for all to see. This is the spotlight effect. The tendency to believe we are the center of everyone else's attention. But the truth is gentler. Most people are far too busy worrying about themselves to notice the details we obsess over. The crowd is not a spotlight. It is a collection of individuals, each under their own. This realization can be liberating. The joke you told that fell flat, most people forgot it moments later. The slip in your words, others barely registered it because they were rehearsing their own. What feels monumental to us is often invisible to others. And yet, there is another twist in how people perceive us. Not all mistakes diminish us. Sometimes, a small stumble makes us more human, more likable. This is the Pratfall effect. When someone who is already competent makes a minor blunder, it softens their image. It strips away intimidation and replaces it with relatability. Think of a leader giving a speech with confidence and clarity, then laughing at themselves when they drop their notes. Instead of losing respect, they often gain warmth. The error proves their humanity. Or imagine a highly skilled professional who admits with a smile, "I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out." Far from weakening credibility, the humility can build trust. But the key is competence first. A pratfall only adds charm if the person has already shown strength. If the stumble comes before proof of ability, it may reinforce doubt instead of affection. Together, these two effects reveal something profound about perception. We are not watched as closely as we fear, and when we are, imperfection can sometimes endear us. In interviews, leaders who share small, honest mistakes can appear more approachable. In public conversations, showing vulnerability can bridge distance. In relationships, a stumble can replace tension with laughter. So how do we practice this? Start with perspective. When you feel the spotlight burning on you, pause for 30 seconds and remind yourself, everyone else is under their own spotlight too. And when you've already demonstrated competence, allow yourself small, intentional pratfalls, a self-deprecating joke, a moment of imperfection embraced, not as a mask, but as a reminder that humanity is more magnetic than perfection. Because the paradox is this: we fear the gaze of others, yet their gaze is often lighter than we think. And when we dare to stumble, we may find connection where we expected judgment. The spotlight effect teaches us to release unnecessary fear. The pratfall effect teaches us to embrace small flaws. Together, they remind us that authenticity, not perfection, is what draws people closer. And once we see how impression can be reshaped by light and shadow, we begin to notice another force, one that makes us cling to what we already own, far beyond its true value. 20. FOMO, JOMO. Have you ever scrolled through your phone late at night and felt a pang of anxiety? Photos of friends at a party, colleagues announcing new projects, strangers traveling to places you've never been. A restless whisper rises. Everyone else is living more fully, and I am being left behind. This is FOMO, the fear of missing out, a psychological trigger that makes us worry about the opportunities, experiences, or rewards we might be losing. FOMO pushes us toward impulsive choices, overcommitment, and exhaustion. We say yes to things not because we truly want them, but because we fear what it means to say no. Marketers know this well. Only 2 spots left. Join the 1,000 people already enrolled. Flash sale ends in 1 hour. These phrases ignite urgency. They bypass reflection and push us into decisions we might later regret. But FOMO is not only in shopping or advertising, it infiltrates daily life. agreeing to too many invitations, piling commitments onto your calendar, fearing that every no will cut you off from some hidden chance. The irony is that the more you chase everything, the less present you become in anything. At its root, FOMO is about comparison. It feeds on the illusion that others are living lives more exciting, more meaningful, more abundant than our own. But this comparison is built on fragments, curated images, brief announcements, surface-level signals. We rarely see the full truth of anyone else's life. We see only the highlight reel. So what is the antidote? JOMO, the joy of missing out, a shift in perspective that celebrates the choices you make instead of lamenting the ones you didn't. It is the quiet confidence of saying, I chose this path and I am here fully. It is the relief of knowing that not every opportunity is meant for you and that missing out is not loss. It is space. JOMO turns absence into presence. When you decline one invitation, you give yourself the gift of depth in another area, time with family, rest for your body, focus on your craft. What you miss becomes the soil for what you gain. So how can we cultivate this shift? With a pause. Take 30 seconds the next time FOMO strikes. Ask yourself, do I truly want this, or am I only afraid of missing it? If the answer leans toward fear, breathe, let it pass. Then take one practical step. Unfollow or mute a source that triggers your FOMO. A social feed, a marketing list, a voice that constantly tells you you're falling behind. Create space for your own rhythm, your own priorities. Because the truth is, you cannot live every life. You can only live your own. And the deeper you choose it, the richer it becomes. FOMO drains us with scarcity. JOMO fills us with presence. One binds us to fear, the other frees us to joy. And when we shift from fear to joy, from chasing every possibility to cherishing our chosen ones, we discover something even deeper about happiness itself. That it always runs on a treadmill, always demanding more unless we learn how to step off. 21. Hedonic Treadmill. Think back to the last time you achieved something you had long desired. Perhaps it was a promotion, a new phone, a long-awaited trip. The joy was real. For a few days, even weeks, you felt lifted, lighter, satisfied. And then, quietly, that feeling faded. The promotion became routine, the phone became ordinary, the trip became a memory. You return to your usual baseline of happiness. This is the hedonic treadmill, the human tendency to adapt quickly to changes, both good and bad, and to return to a stable level of happiness over time. At first glance, it seems discouraging. Win the lottery, and research shows that within a year, many winners are no happier than before. Suffer a difficult setback, and over time, many people recover to their emotional baseline as well. The highs and lows pass. The treadmill brings us back to level ground. Why does this happen? Because the brain is designed for adaptation. What is new soon becomes normal. The extraordinary fades into the everyday. This adaptation kept our ancestors moving forward, always seeking, always striving. But in the modern world, it traps us in a loop. The more we chase pleasure, the more it slips back to neutral. Consumer culture thrives on this treadmill. We buy the newest gadget only to feel its shine dim within weeks. We chase experiences only to crave the next one. The cycle whispers, more will make you happier. But more only resets the treadmill, and the running never ends. Yet hidden inside this effect is not only frustration, but hope. If joy fades, so does sorrow. If triumph loses its glow, so does tragedy lose its sting. We are more resilient than we realize. The treadmill hums beneath our feet, carrying us back to balance again and again. So how do we step off the endless chase? The answer lies not in refusing pleasure, but in shifting how we hold it. First, gratitude. Instead of always reaching for the next, pause to notice the now. Daily recognition of what you already have stretches satisfaction beyond the initial spark. It transforms fleeting pleasure into enduring appreciation. Second, presence. Savoring ordinary moments, shared meals, morning light, simple rituals, slows adaptation. When you name the moment as precious, it resists fading so quickly into the background. Third, perspective. Understand that happiness is not a permanent peak, but a rhythm. It rises and falls, and the falls do not mean failure. They mean your mind is returning to balance. Here's a practice. Take 30 seconds each day to write down one thing you are grateful for, not extraordinary, just ordinary. A conversation, a taste, a silence. By doing so, you stretch the life of joy, keeping it alive beyond its first spark. Because the hedonic treadmill teaches us this, chasing more will not secure happiness, but noticing more, appreciating more can. And once we realize that the pursuit of more is endless, we turn to a deeper question. If we adapt so quickly to pleasure and pain, how do we decide who we truly are? How do we anchor our identity beyond the fleeting highs and lows of experience? 22. Loss, aversion, and endowment. Imagine finding $20 on the street. A rush of joy runs through you, unexpected fortune, a lucky break. Now imagine, on another day, losing $20 from your pocket. The sting lingers longer. The pain feels sharper, heavier, harder to shake. This is loss aversion, the tendency of the human mind to feel losses almost twice as strongly as gains. A win may lift us, but a loss can crush us more deeply. And because of this imbalance, our decisions often tilt toward avoiding pain rather than pursuing joy. We see it in investments. People hold on to losing stocks far too long, unwilling to admit the loss, hoping for a rebound. We see it in relationships. Someone stays in an unhealthy bond, not because it brings happiness, but because the pain of leaving feels greater than the joy of freedom. We see it in everyday life when we hesitate to try something new, not because the potential gains aren't real, but because the risk of failure looms larger in our imagination. Layered on top of this is the endowment effect. Once we own something, we assign it greater value than we would if it belonged to someone else. A mug you buy for $2 suddenly feels worth far more once it is yours. Ask someone else to pay $5 for the same mug, and they will balk. Ownership inflates worth in our minds. Together, these two effects form a powerful trap. We cling tightly to what we already have, fearing loss, exaggerating value, making choices that defy logic. Marketers and businesses use this constantly. Free trials let you own a service temporarily. Once it's yours, letting go feels like losing something valuable, even if you didn't want it in the first place. Sales that flash almost gone exploit both principles. Scarcity heightens desire, loss aversion magnifies the pain of missing out, and ownership, real or imagined, anchors value. But awareness can break the spell. Here's how. First, reframe decisions. Instead of only asking, "What might I lose?" ask, "What might I gain?" Flip the perspective. If I give this up, what space or freedom do I gain in return? By seeing both sides, loss loses some of its sting. Second, test ownership. When deciding whether to keep or buy something, ask yourself, if this item weren't already mine, how much would I pay to have it? This question strips away the illusion of inflated value and grounds your choice in reality. Third, practice small releases. Donate an object you've been keeping but no longer use. Notice the relief, the lightness that follows. It reminds you that losing can sometimes be a form of gaining. Here's a 30-second exercise. Pick one possession in your room. Imagine it does not belong to you. How much would you truly value it then? By doing this, you train your mind to see beyond the bias of ownership. Because the truth is, happiness is not found in clinging, but in letting go. Loss aversion warns us of pain, but it can also trap us in fear. The endowment effect elevates our treasures, but it can also weigh us down with what no longer serves us. To recognize these forces is to loosen their grip. To release is to free. And once we see how ownership distorts value, we also begin to notice how easily stories we tell ourselves distort responsibility, how quick we are to take credit for success, and how quick we are to shift blame for failure. 23. Dunning-Kruger Effect. Have you ever met someone who spoke with absolute certainty about a subject they barely understood? They explained with confidence, dismissed questions, and seemed unaware of their own gaps. Meanwhile, someone far more knowledgeable, an expert, a professional, spoke cautiously, emphasizing complexity and admitting uncertainty. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a cognitive bias where those with low ability tend to overestimate themselves, while those with high ability often underestimate themselves. Why does this happen? Because the skills required to perform well are often the same skills required to recognize performance. When someone lacks competence, they also lack the awareness to see their own shortcomings. Ignorance hides itself. By contrast, true expertise reveals the vastness of what is still unknown. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more there is to learn. Think of driving. A novice driver, freshly licensed, may feel fearless, believing they have mastered the road. An experienced driver, after years of navigating storms, traffic, and accidents, knows better. They respect the risks. They drive with caution, not because they know less, but because they know more. Or consider the workplace. The least experienced employee might speak loudest in meetings, certain their solution is obvious. The seasoned professional, aware of the hidden complexities, speaks more carefully, often doubting themselves. This effect appears in public life as well. Loud voices often dominate debates, not because they hold deeper wisdom, but because they hold less doubt. And paradoxically, doubt is often the mark of real understanding. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is not just about others. It lives in us too. Each of us has areas where we overestimate and areas where we shrink back unnecessarily. Recognizing this bias is not about shaming ignorance, but about cultivating humility and curiosity. So how do we guard against the trap? First, keep a checklist of what you don't know. Instead of only listing accomplishments, track unanswered questions, unfamiliar skills, and areas you have yet to explore. This shifts the focus from certainty to growth. Second, seek feedback, specific, not vague. Ask colleagues, mentors, or friends, what is one thing I could improve? Concrete feedback punctures illusions, both of false confidence and of unnecessary doubt. Third, balance confidence with openness. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It is the ability to act while remaining willing to learn. Here's a 30-second exercise. Write down one task you feel confident about. Then, beneath it, list 2 aspects of that task you might not fully understand. By naming the unknown, you invite humility without losing strength. Because the Dunning-Kruger Effect teaches us this: loud certainty is not always wisdom, and quiet doubt is not always weakness. True knowledge is not about knowing everything. It is about recognizing how much remains beyond our grasp. And once we see how confidence and ignorance can entwine, we begin to notice another bias: how quickly we excuse our own failures while blaming others for theirs. 24. False consensus effect. Have you ever been surprised when someone close to you strongly disagreed with something you thought was obvious? You might have thought, surely everyone feels this way. And yet, they didn't. In fact, many people didn't. This is the false consensus effect. The tendency to overestimate how much others share our beliefs, values, and behaviors. We assume that our way of seeing the world is the common one, that our circle of friends, our community, our online feed reflects the world at large. Why does this happen? Because humans seek validation. It feels safer to believe we are aligned with the majority, and because our environments often act as echo chambers, filled with people who think like us, watch what we watch, read what we read. The illusion deepens. The repetition of similar voices convinces us this must be what everyone thinks. But the world is larger than our circles, and outside the chamber, perspectives can be startlingly different. You can see this in politics. A person living in a community that leans heavily one way may believe the whole country leans the same. The shock of an election result often comes not from a sudden shift, but from realizing the bubble hid half the picture. You can see it in everyday habits. If you and your friends recycle, you might assume most people do. If you and your circle don't exercise, you might believe few others do either. In both cases, personal experience inflates into assumed consensus. Social media intensifies this. Algorithms feed us more of what we already believe, surrounding us with agreement. And when disagreement does appear, it often arrives in extreme or hostile form, reinforcing the illusion that reasonable people must all think as we do. The danger of false consensus is that it narrows our empathy. If we assume everyone thinks like us, we struggle to understand disagreement. We dismiss others as foolish or misinformed, instead of recognizing genuine differences in values and experience. So how do we break the illusion? With deliberate exposure. Step outside the echo chamber. Read one source of news or opinion that challenges your perspective. But don't stop at dismissal. Look for at least one point that carries sense, one thread of reason you can acknowledge. Here's a 30-second practice. Next time you encounter a view opposite to yours, pause and write down one single argument from that side that is reasonable, even if you don't agree overall. This act stretches the mind. It reminds you that consensus is rarely total, and that truth often lives in nuance. Because the false consensus effect teaches us a humbling truth. We are not the center of the world's agreement. Our beliefs are not automatically universal. And recognizing this doesn't weaken conviction. It strengthens understanding. The world is not an echo. It is a chorus. And the more voices we learn to hear, the closer we come to clarity. And once we see how easily we assume agreement where none exists, we begin to notice another distortion, how strongly we cling to our first impressions even in the face of new evidence. 25. Just world hypothesis. Deep down, many of us carry a quiet belief. The world is fair. Good people are rewarded, bad people are punished, effort leads to success, and failure must mean a flaw. It is a comforting story. It makes life feel predictable, controllable, safe. This is the just world hypothesis, the illusion that the universe runs on fairness, that outcomes reflect deserts. And while this belief can comfort us, it can also blind us. Because when bad things happen to good people, the story trembles, and rather than let go of the belief, the mind twists reality. We blame the victim. They must have done something to deserve it. We minimize suffering. It couldn't have been that bad. We invent reasons. If they were smarter, stronger, more careful, this wouldn't have happened. Think of how people often respond to tragedy. A person loses their home to disaster, and whispers spread. Why didn't they prepare better? A victim of assault is asked, what were they wearing? Why were they there? The just world hypothesis protects our sense of order by distorting compassion. It also warps our view of success. We assume the wealthy earn their fortune purely through hard work. We assume the struggling must have been lazy. But the truth is more complex. External factors, luck, privilege, timing, systemic barriers shape outcomes as much as individual effort. The illusion of a just world erases these realities. Why do we hold on to it? Because believing the world is fair gives us comfort. If bad things only happen to those who deserve them, then we feel safer. It won't happen to us, we tell ourselves, because we live the right way. But this is not truth. It is self-protection disguised as fairness. So how do we break the spell without sinking into despair? By widening our lens. When we see success or failure, pause for 30 seconds and ask, what external factors might have contributed to this outcome? Consider circumstances, support systems, chance. This simple question breaks the reflex of blame and opens the door to empathy. We can still value responsibility and effort without pretending the world is perfectly just. We can hold people accountable without assuming every outcome is deserved. And by doing so, we soften judgment, both toward others and toward ourselves. Because the just world hypothesis teaches us something profound. Life is not always fair, but in recognizing this, we can choose fairness in how we treat one another. We cannot guarantee justice from the universe, but we can practice justice in our own actions, in our own communities, in our own words. The comfort of a just world is an illusion, but compassion, even in an unjust world, is real. And once we see how our minds cling to fairness where none exists, we begin to notice another distortion, how we justify our own choices after the fact, weaving reasons to explain why we did what we did, even when the reasons came later. 26th, Placebo and Nocebo Effect. Imagine a doctor handing you a small white pill. They tell you it is a powerful pain reliever. You swallow it, and within an hour, your pain softens. But here's the twist. The pill contained nothing active at all. This is the placebo effect, the strange and profound reality that positive expectations alone can lead to real improvement in symptoms. Pain lessens, anxiety eases, even performance can rise, without any chemical change in the body. The power lies not in the pill, but in the belief. When you expect healing, your brain releases its own medicine. endorphins, dopamine, calming signals through the nervous system. The story you believe becomes the experience you live. But there is a darker twin, the Nocebo effect, when negative expectations create real harm. If you are told a harmless substance may cause nausea, you might actually feel sick. If you expect a treatment to fail, the failure can become real, not because of the treatment itself, but because of the belief surrounding it. Both effects remind us the mind is not separate from the body. Belief can heal and belief can wound. Examples appear everywhere. Athletes who visualize success often perform better, not only from practice, but because expectation primes the body for action. Patients in clinical trials sometimes report relief from sugar pills or side effects from inactive substances, depending on what they were told to expect. Even in daily life, a pep talk before a challenge can lift performance, while a careless warning can sap confidence. Marketers understand this power too. A drink labeled energy booster can make you feel more alert even if the formula is ordinary. A product described as premium can taste richer even if it is identical to the standard version. Expectation colors perception. So how do we navigate this double-edged sword? The answer is not to dismiss belief, but to guide it wisely. First, neutralize negative suggestions. When confronted with warnings, pause and remind yourself, the worst case is possible, but not inevitable. By framing the thought as one possibility, not certainty, you reduce the nocebo effect. Second, cultivate positive but realistic stories. Expect improvement, but in a way that feels grounded. This treatment may help my body heal. This effort may make me stronger. Reasonable optimism harnesses placebo without tipping into denial. Third, build rituals of belief. A pre-performance routine, a calming mantra, a mindful pause, each signals to the brain, I am preparing, I am supported, I am ready. And belief responds with real changes in mood, focus, and resilience. Here's a 30-second practice. When facing something difficult, pause and write down one positive but realistic outcome you can imagine. Then repeat it to yourself as you begin. This small act sets expectation in your favor, planting seeds for placebo instead of nocebo. Because the lesson is clear. Belief is not everything, but it is not nothing either. The stories we carry in our minds ripple through our bodies, shaping how we feel, how we heal, how we perform. Placebo and nocebo remind us reality is filtered not only through what happens to us, but through what we expect of it. And once we see how expectation alone can shift experience, we begin to wonder, how often are the choices we make shaped less by reason and more by the invisible pull of habit itself? 27. Ostrich Effect. Picture an ostrich in the desert. The myth says that when danger approaches, it buries its head in the sand, believing that what it cannot see cannot hurt it. Of course, real ostriches do not behave this way, but people often do. This is the Ostrich Effect. The tendency to avoid negative information in order to reduce stress in the moment, even though avoidance often leads to greater harm in the long run. Think of finances. Bills pile up, statements arrive, but instead of opening them, we delay. For a moment, the stress eases, out of sight, out of mind. But the numbers don't vanish. They grow quietly until the burden is heavier. Think of health. A troubling symptom appears, but instead of seeing a doctor, we tell ourselves it will pass. We buy time with denial. But time does not heal what needs attention, and by the time we look, the problem may be worse. Think of relationships. An uncomfortable conversation waits, hurt feelings, unresolved conflict. We avoid it, convincing ourselves that silence is peace. But the silence thickens, distance grows, and what could have been mended with honesty hardens into resentment. The ostrich effect is seductive because it works briefly. When we turn away, anxiety softens. The present feels lighter, but the price is deferred pain. What we avoid today often returns tomorrow, larger, sharper, harder to bear. Why do we do this? Because facing bad news threatens our sense of control. Looking at the bank balance confirms limits. Hearing a diagnosis confirms vulnerability. Admitting conflict confirms imperfection. Avoidance offers temporary safety, even if it erodes real safety over time. So how do we break the cycle? With small, deliberate acts of courage. Here's a practice. Each day, choose one hard truth you have been avoiding. It could be a number, a message, a task, a conversation. Name it clearly. This is my difficult truth today. Then take one smallest possible action toward it. Not the whole problem, just one step. Open the envelope, make the call, write the first sentence. The act of facing, even in fragments, shifts the pattern. Because the ostrich effect is not about weakness, it is about fear. And fear shrinks when named, when looked at directly. To face reality does not mean surrendering to it. It means giving yourself the chance to respond, to adapt, to heal. So the next time you feel the pull to turn away, pause. Remind yourself, avoiding pain today plants deeper pain for tomorrow. But meeting pain with a small step today plants freedom for the future. The ostrich effect teaches us this. Denial offers comfort, but truth offers power. And once we learn to look where we fear to look, we discover a deeper resilience, the strength to stand even when reality is hard. And if denial can blind us to threats, then imagine what happens when certainty blinds us to nuance. When we cling so tightly to being right that we stop seeing the fuller picture. 28. Hindsight Bias. Think of the last time a big event unfolded. An election result, a sports match, a friend's breakup. After hearing the outcome, did you catch yourself saying, "I knew it would happen like this"? Even if before it happened, you weren't so sure. This is hindsight bias, the tendency to see events as more predictable after they have already occurred. It feels as though we always knew, even if the truth is that we didn't. Why does the mind do this? Because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Not knowing the future makes us feel vulnerable. So once an outcome is revealed, the brain rewrites memory, smoothing over doubt and replacing it with false clarity. It tells us a story where the path was inevitable, where we were wise all along. You can see this in history. Once a major event occurs, a war, a financial crash, a scientific breakthrough, people often look back and say the signs were obvious. But at the time, those signs were lost among countless other possibilities. The future is messy. The past is tidy because hindsight edits it. You can see it in everyday life too. A relationship ends, and friends say it was doomed from the start. A company fails, and analysts claim the warning signs were clear. But much of this certainty is illusion, built after the fact. The danger of hindsight bias is twofold. First, it makes us overconfident. If we believe we always knew, we may assume our judgments are sharper than they are. This can lead us into reckless decisions, trusting a wisdom that isn't truly there. Second, it blocks learning. If the outcome always seemed obvious, We stop asking, what could I have done differently? What did I miss? We fail to examine mistakes because in hindsight, they no longer look like mistakes. They look like inevitabilities. So how do we counter this illusion? By keeping a record of our uncertainty. Here's a practice. Before major events, predictions, or decisions, write down your expectations clearly with numbers. For example, I think there's a 60% chance this project succeeds, a 30% chance it struggles, and a 10% chance it fails completely. Seal the note. Then, when the outcome arrives, return to your record. The written evidence will reveal whether you truly knew it all along or whether hindsight is tricking you. This habit trains humility. It reminds us that the future is not obvious, that our vision is partial, that mistakes are opportunities to learn. Because the truth is, life rarely unfolds with the neatness we imagine afterward. The story always looks cleaner in the rearview mirror. But wisdom lies in remembering how messy the road actually felt while driving it. Hindsight bias teaches us that certainty is often an illusion crafted by memory after the fact. By naming it, by keeping honest records, we free ourselves to learn from the past instead of rewriting it. And once we see how our minds smooth over uncertainty, we realize how many of our thoughts are not records of reality, but reconstructions, stories stitched together after the moment has passed. 29. McGurk and Barnum Effect. Close your eyes for a moment and listen to the syllable ba, ba, ba. It is clear, steady, unmistakable. Now open your eyes and watch a person's lips silently mouthing fa, 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 while the sound in your ears stays the same. Ba. Strangely, what you now hear is not ba anymore, but fa. This is the McGurk Effect, a striking reminder that our senses are not independent, but woven together. When sight and sound clash, the brain doesn't choose one, it fuses them. Vision overrules hearing, rewriting the experience itself. The lesson is humbling. We do not perceive reality directly. We perceive a construction stitched from different senses, shaped by expectation. Our eyes can bend our ears, just as our beliefs can bend our thoughts. And that leads us to another illusion, the Barnum Effect. Think of reading a horoscope. The words describe you as sometimes outgoing, sometimes reserved, as someone who strives for connection but also values independence. It feels eerily accurate. This is me, you think, but the same words could apply to almost anyone. This is the Barnum Effect, the tendency to accept vague general statements as uniquely personal. We fill in the blanks, shaping the words to fit ourselves. Fortune tellers, personality quizzes, even online algorithms use this. The statements are crafted to sound specific, but are broad enough to catch nearly everyone. Why do we fall for it? Because we want to be seen. When a description seems to mirror us, we relax into belief. And because the statements are flattering more often than critical, they slide past our skepticism. You have great untapped potential. You sometimes doubt yourself, but deep down, you are strong. Who wouldn't nod along? Both the McGurk and Barnum effects reveal the same truth. Perception is not pure. It is filtered, bent, shaped by our senses, by our hopes, by our hunger for recognition. The McGurk effect shows how even basic perception can be altered when senses collide. The Barnum effect shows how easily vague words can capture us when they echo our desires. So how do we defend ourselves? With awareness and with pause. Here's a 30-second practice. When you encounter a description that feels uncannily true, stop and ask, could this apply to almost everyone? If the answer is yes, then the power is not in the words, but in your interpretation. And when you notice your senses disagree, when eyes and ears send different messages, remind yourself, perception is a construction, not a mirror. This humility guards against overconfidence in what we think we know. Because the McGurk and Barnum effects teach us something vital. We are not passive recorders of reality. We are storytellers, stitching fragments into coherence, even when coherence is an illusion. And once we see how fragile perception can be, we end where we began, with the humbling realization that the mind is full of shortcuts, tricks, and biases, not to frighten us, but to remind us that awareness is the first step toward freedom. We have traveled through illusions and shortcuts of the mind, 33 ways thought can twist, bend, or betray itself. At first glance, it may seem overwhelming, as if the mind is nothing but a field of traps. But awareness changes everything. When you see the pattern, you're no longer caught in it. When you know the trick, you are no longer tricked. Each effect we explored is not just a danger, but a mirror. It shows you how your mind works, how it seeks ease, certainty, belonging, safety. These are not flaws, but instincts. And when you recognize them, you can guide them. Picture in the center of your palm a small compass, not of metal, but of questions. Each time you pause to ask, am I reacting to the frame or the facts? Do I want this, or do I just fear missing it? If this were the first request, would I still say yes? Each question draws a line, a direction, a gentle north. The world remains noisy. The tricks remain clever. But with the compass of awareness, you don't have to wander blindly. You can choose your path step by step, with more clarity, more freedom. Not perfectly, not always, but clearly enough to notice, freely enough to breathe, and gently enough to choose what truly fits you. Ro rang hon mo chut, tu do hon mo chut. Va ju diu dang ge kong jo fu hop vo min.